Hi, everybody. Welcome back to English 221. This is for our Wednesday class for the 17th of February. And this past Monday was President's Day, so we did not have class. Where we left off last class was beginning to watch a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, where I had asked you to watch the first part of the production, which was approximately an hour or so. The production is divided up into three parts, so I thought that we could see it in three separate sessions. And I discussed some of the things that you might want to consider in terms of the play itself as you're watching that production, but we'll talk more about the play as we continue on with the course. But thinking a little bit about the title, and I can tell you that right now dreams are a very important theme throughout the play. The idea of midsummer is also going to be something that's important that we will talk about. And midsummer is a pagan holiday, so there's a good amount of pagan references that are embedded within the text. And we know that we have a fairy world, and the first part of the play was devoted to illustrating not only the celebratory nature of the play with the music and the dance, but also to introduce us to a multitude of characters. There isn't necessarily one character who is the star in the way that you would find in, let's say, a Shakespearean tragedy. In this play, we've got a multitude of couples who represent different ages, different statuses, and different backgrounds, but they all are experiencing difficulties in love, which is what a Shakespearean comedy is about, the complications and difficulties of love, and ultimately a resolution so that we are going to get a happy ending. So we as audience know that there can't be any death, and that regardless of what occurs at the end, there will be marriage or the promise of marriage. And as we continue on watching the 2014 version from Shakespeare's Globe, I am going to ask you to consider what's going on in terms of plot specifically. And I have some of that listed in the notes below. That where we left off is that because of the love juice, now both men are in love with Helena, who happens to be our tall blonde, which would go against the conceptions of the time of beauty, or actually who would support the conceptions of the time of beauty, as opposed to Hermia, who is a short brunette, that would go against the conceptions of beauty, though the play begins with both men being interested in Hermia. And the difficulty, or one of the many difficulties, is that Helena and Hermia were former best friends. So some interesting commentary on what can happen in friendship when love is involved. Now, Helena, because she's been rejected thus far, believes that she's the victim of a prank and that somehow they're mocking her. Hermia, however, believes that her former best friend has stolen her basically man. So what we've got here is the perfect setup for conflict and drama. In some ways, much like a soap opera. A catfight basically ensues with lots of insults, and many of those insults may not necessarily make sense to a contemporary audience. We'll talk about some of them, but for instance, when Helena is called a painted maypole, I can tell you right now that painted is in reference to cosmetics. And as we know from Shakespearean sonnets, using cosmetics is something that's considered bad, it's unnatural, and oftentimes associated with women who perhaps might be somewhat loose in nature, especially when it's paired with something called a maypole. Now, the reference to May Day in this particular drama is one that's going to be important because that is also a pagan holiday, and it's one in which fertility is celebrated. So it's an interesting day for Shakespeare to discuss in this play because virginity was so valued, especially for female, during the time period, and yet it's taking place in both midsummer, and there's also reference to May Day, and midsummer would be the longest day of the year in June as opposed to May Day, which is the 1st of May, but regardless, both of those are considered to be pagan holidays where there's celebration of fertility. And the way to best celebrate fertility is through sexual union. So again, there are lots of sexual connotations and references to the setting and the time of this particular play. And the maypole has a direct phallic reference in May Day. So I don't know if any of you ever celebrated May Day in elementary school, where you would dance around a maypole. But the maypole was supposed to represent the phallus, which is something that I'm sure they are not telling elementary school children if that's what they are doing when they are participating in that particular holiday. So we put all of this together. We know that Helena is tall, so that's one of the reasons why she's called a maypole. But she's also called a maypole because basically Hermia is telling her that she is a phallus. And she is a painted or a cosmetic phallus. So she's accusing her of being a whore and being unnatural and also being a phallus. All of that in just 2 words. 2 words that probably are not discussed in great depth in elementary school. This is a play that oftentimes is discussed in elementary and junior high school and high school because of there's lots of music and dance. There's a great celebratory element to it, and because of the happy ending and because of the themes of love. But more often than not, the sexuality is not discussed in the play, nor is the political commentary. And there is a good amount of political commentary, which we will see towards the ending of the play. But even thus far, what we've seen is that regardless of age and regardless of status, everybody is equally ridiculous when it comes to love. And we see that played out very nicely in A Midsummer. After this, what I call catfight, if we were watching, let's say, a tragedy, well, then death would have ensued. But we know we're watching a comedy, so there has to be some resolution. Note that this would be the height of conflict in the play, Act 3, which is the top of that pyramid structure I was referencing in terms of the play. And then ultimately, we need resolution. So Love Juice is removed from Lysander, and he returns to loving Hermia. And the love juice remains on Demetrius. Remember that Puck basically has claimed that he's made a mistake when he first put the love juice on Lysander's eyes, saying that he was merely taught or told to put the love juice on the eyes of the man wearing the Athenian garb. And there's 2 ways an actor can play this. They can play this innocently as if it was a mistake, or because Puck is known for being very mischievous, they could play it as very deliberate on Puck's part in order to create havoc. But it is very clear that in terms of rectifying the mistake, Puck never removes the love juice from Lysander's eyes when he ultimately makes sure that Demetrius now has the love juice. The result? 2 men are in love with Helena rather than Hermia, which leads to all kinds of possibilities. So the love juice is removed from Lysander and he returns to loving Hermia, which is where we were, the status quo at the beginning of the play. The love juice remains on Demetrius, so he remains loving Hermia. And that's something we'll talk about how and why that might be seen as a positive ending, even though he has been manipulated, basically, to be in love. Though we could argue that he had loved her prior to the play, so perhaps this is a restoration of order, so to speak. The love juice is removed from Titania because at this point Oberon has been able to get his changeling child, and this is another power play amongst many power plays that we see referenced throughout the drama. And at this point, Titania has been humiliated but also humbled. And she gives up the changeling so that now Oberon can show her that she was in love with, well, an ass, which was the great humor that Puck was able to add to this play of his own accord, and that he happened to find Bottom and thought that he acted like an ass and decided to turn him into a donkey or an ass. By the way, the ass was considered to be the most well-endowed creature in the animal kingdom in Shakespeare's time, so there is a good amount of sexual commentary here too, since the assumption is that they have consummated their relationship, and we certainly see that in terms of this particular performance. At any rate, now Bottom has to be returned back to his human form. That doesn't mean that he's any less ass-like, and one would think at this particular point that we're close to the ending of the play. However, we're only in Act 4, and what we've got is a complete 5th act that would seem to be superfluous, and this is where we're going to follow up next class, where we get Bottom and his cohorts performing the play within a play. But nothing is superfluous with Shakespeare, and we'll see how that play within a play does a nice job of not only mirroring the action that we've seen thus far, but making social and political commentary as well. So the last attendance question, I asked you to consider which actor performance you preferred. And of course, there was no right or wrong answer to that. And this attendance question, I thought I would ask you the opposite. And this would be due on Thursday, the 18th at 10 a.m. Thus far, which actor's performance do you like the least in the 2014 Shakespeare on Screen adaptation, and why? So I'll leave you with this so that you can watch the second part of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Next class, we will finish up with watching A Midsummer Night's Dream, and then after that, we'll discuss the play itself. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well, and we will continue on. Enjoy A Midsummer Night's Dream.